Hi, and welcome to AI for UX. This is the space where UX researchers and product leaders stay current with AI innovations. So I'm John Whalen, and I'm the founder of Brilliant Experience, a psychology-driven product innovation firm. And I've struggled to keep up with all the AI tools for UX research, and I'm guessing I'm not alone. And that's why I started this series. In each installment, we'll be speaking with the founder of one of the latest AI enhanced research tools and dive deep into the inspiration for the tool, how it might benefit you, and where it's headed, and ask about where the field is headed. And just a quick note, these videos are not product endorsements. Brilliant pays full price for any technologies we use, and neither party is getting paid. So the purpose is simply to learn about new technologies together. So let's get started. And today, welcome Max. I've got Max Fergus, and he's the CEO and founder of UserCue. And that's a tool that I'll let Max tell us more about, but ultimately creates bespoke AI research agents that fully automates the end-to-end research process. So thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview with us. We're delighted to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, let me just dive right into your product, and we'll circle back to kind of how it all got started. So ultimately, for UserQ, who do you feel is your target audience?
I think our target audience, if I had to simplify it, would pretty much be anybody that's doing primary research. So not secondary research like, looking at research reports or, looking at kind of secondary publications, but market research firms, management consulting firms, strategy consultants,
Hmm.
agencies, most of the time that are doing work on behalf of B2B and B2C companies or even larger enterprises like healthcare and life sciences. But usually our tool is best served for the firms that are really doing a lot of the primary research.
Okay. So ultimately, what is it that your sort of product addresses, or how do you really help with all that?
Absolutely. I think the core value proposition is efficiency and time savings. So if we look at one of the studies that we just did, for example, the Singapore budget, for example, came out on Friday. We were contracted by a market research firm and the government of Singapore to basically do a full qualitative research study over the weekend, where user queue interviews using our technology citizens in an automated IDI using AI, and then also does all of the reporting and analysis. So, in that study, for example, we saved about 400 hours of associate and analyst time moderating, interviewing, transcribing, doing analysis, and ultimately reporting. And UserQ is an end to end primary research tool for qualitative studies at scale.
Okay. Great. No, it really is impressive, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you on. So, is there a specific target like scenario when a UX researcher or a product team or market research team would use your tool?
I think we live in a world where almost everybody wants answers more quickly. And so I think when we think about all of the areas, both in research and just in business, when that happens, it's kind of a lot, right? Early stage startups that are doing customer discovery, trying to iterate rapidly. Maybe they don't necessarily know exactly how to approach doing customer discovery or research. And now we're starting to see, because the technology is advancing so quickly, there's new use cases that are ultimately growing. Yes, getting product feedback more quickly, but also doing rapid market response reports for new
Mhm.
policies that come out. In the market research landscape, we do a lot of these where with current events, in the political landscape, and obviously a lot of these are industry agnostic use cases where qualitative research at scale can be applied.
Got it. Yeah, and I do find it hard to find an obvious constraint. Well, actually, one of the things I did want to ask you too was this is called AI for UX, and in some ways, I guess Maybe you almost could answer this the opposite, but we typically ask, how is AI integrated into your tool? But in some ways, I guess, is there how much human intervention is there? So maybe you can just tell me a little bit about the AI brains behind this. Certainly not divulging your tech secrets, but just to give us a sense of what it's doing.
Totally. I'm a big believer that there are a lot of really, really smart AI teams out there right now that are building great technology. I do think that there's a lot of teams that are building solutions looking for problems. And I think that's because the AI technology that we have today is so exciting and it's evolving so rapidly. We want to kind of shove AI into all of the different areas of our products and services. But I'm a big believer that ultimately AI should be used in, one, two, three really specific ways where it has the opportunity to add value. And there's still a huge amount of human intervention when it comes to, using a product and making it really easy to use, right? And not necessarily all of those are AI tools every time, just like traditional software. And so for us, we have a complex AI pipeline system that basically manages two separate functions for our service or our platform. The first is we run completely in depth, automated, human level intelligent interviews using AI. So we can do 5 minute to 60-minute in depth interviews with scientists, customers, vendors, citizens, and that's kind of the first area that we use AI. The second area that we use AI, and it is very much so connected from an AI standpoint to the first part, is in the analysis and the reporting. So if we go do 50 in depth interviews, the same AI that is doing all of those AI moderated interviews is also doing all of the reporting and analysis for these really in depth, complex research studies. And so those are the two ways that AI
Mhm.
really powers our kind of primary research engine.
Yeah. I did want to ask too. If I'm someone, for example, who's traditionally done the moderation, done the analysis, and so on. So, how should we think about working with a tool like yours? Have people typically done a subset of interviews or other research, human to human, and then done it with yours as well to augment it, or 100% with your tool? How might we think about working differently once we have access to UserQ?
Absolutely. I think in many ways we think about it almost as a new research methodology, and a new research methodology definitely means new use cases. So I'll give you a few examples. First, we'll have, let's say, a big market research firm wants to interview 10 key opinion leaders in a certain field. Well, now with UserQ, we can do 100 interviews in the first day, present a full report that basically validates or tests our hypothesis. And so a lot of firms will use us for pre screening. Hey, now we want to identify the 10 interviews that UserQ interviewed where we want to follow up and maybe dive a little bit deeper, right? In a similar vein,
Mhm.
a lot of market research or financial services or management consulting companies will use UserQ for what we call day one diligence. So, hey, we're looking at launching a new product, we're looking at buying a new company, we're looking at understanding the trends in a new industry. Let's go do a 3 day study that would normally take a month or two. And then let's actually use that to refine our hypothesis for the rest of the study. So we now have this beautiful supplemental piece
Mhm.
of data that can actually challenge our core hypothesis initially, allow us to micro pivot the learning objectives and the research questions we're looking to answer to better
Mhm.
complete a full primary research objective. And again, industry
Yeah.
agnostic.
Well, no, that's it's very different. I'm sort of like getting my head around it. It is such a different way of working. And at least currently, a lot of people are talking about, oh, there could be bias in the AI, there could be hallucinations, there could be other things, and naturally, us humanistic kind of people are trying to think about these things and just understand how the tools are sort of acknowledging this or working with this or avoiding those kind of biases and so on. Kind of how have you tried to address these sort of issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest way that we address these issues is that we are not looking at any outside context when we're doing an interview. So when we start a new project with a market research firm or a company, we are basically taking a market research brief, which we call an agent creation form, which looks a little bit like a market research brief, a survey, and an interview guide. And we are basically adding that into our model. We have a number of
Hmm.
AI workflows that go over the top, basically to allow the AI to do cognitive reasoning. But the entire interview experience is meant to be exceptionally objective,
Hmm.
right? So usually the interviews are 65 to 70% structured based on the topics and the kind of priority questions that we want to be asking each participant, and then we let the AI basically control the last 30%, when to probe, when to follow up, when to look a little bit deeper, because it's referencing the learning objectives in the initial market research brief that
Hmm.
we maybe want to be answering and getting a little bit deeper on. It helps us avoid hallucinations, extrapolation, and focus mostly on the hard hitting questions that we would like to know. Very similar to the way that a
Hmm.
moderator would perform an in-depth interview.
No, I actually did want to get to this notion that I don't think everyone has their mind wrapped around, which is that your tool not only would ask the questions that we ask it to ask of the participants, the human participants, but in addition, it does things like follow up questions. So this might be a great time to actually show people a little bit of what you're talking about. So I wonder if we could just take a few moments and you could show us a little bit about how this works.
No, absolutely. I think it's actually helpful to start at the end. So the timing is great, for this interview. This is a groundbreaking study that we published yesterday. And so I want to give the context a little bit. This was what we believe to be the first ever complete in-depth qualitative research study that was entirely done by AI, all the way from research design to interviews, moderating interviews with citizens, and ultimately producing a final report. And ultimately, speed here was the value proposition again. So last Friday, Singapore released their annual budget on Friday night. Normally, the leader for digital intelligence in Singapore is a market research firm called Black Box Research. They normally do a post citizen feedback study every year after the budget comes out. These studies normally will take, in the same way a market research firm will do this with a market landscaping project, 3 to 4 months. Well, for UserCue, what we did is we created an agent once the a budget was announced. Over the weekend, we went out and interviewed 25 citizens in Singapore. And then it takes about 6 hours after the interviews are completed to basically generate a full report. So, as this is a 65-page report, and the entire report that you're looking at here is basically generated by AI. So, even on this screen, you can see how quickly the process took. And you can also see that we saved 400 hours of time and about 75% of the cost to generate this study. And so as you'll go through, you'll see that this is a very nuanced, both quantitative and qualitative research study that we performed in right around 3 days. So by the time that Monday morning came around, we were already done completing the full front end and back end of this overall research.
Just a couple of notes there. So one, we're a bunch of researchers, often scientists, and so naturally skeptic, but want to learn, the deal. And so if I'm right, I think I saw that on LinkedIn you have right now.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so they can take a look. And actually, I just wanted to ask too. It looks nicely formatted. There's lots of major points. So was there sort of an analysis done by the tool, and then ultimately this report was produced, or was this really sort of off the shelf produced by your system?
The entire analysis was done by the report. I think overall, between us, UserQ, and Blackbox, the market research team, there
Hmm.
was probably less than 10 hours of total human intervention in the whole
Hmm.
study. And so most of that came in distributing to the sample that we were looking to interview, a lot of email communication, and then ultimately a little bit of formatting just to make sure that Blackbox was able to basically apply their brand on top of the research study. Everything else, 99.9% of this entire study was completely automated using AI the moment that the interview was distributed.
One other thing that actually reminded me just to say that I hadn't thought about as something about your tool is basically the participant can join the study anytime they want because sort of the operators are standing by, as it were, with your. So it's not like they have to say they have to meet at 4 p.m. or 4 p.m. Pacific or whatever. If I'm right, you can, as a participant, I can kind of just be in the study whenever I feel like it.
Yeah, it's not hard to see where the time savings come from, right? If we think about an average primary research study, and again, this could be a congressional campaign, this could be an energy company, this could be a voice of the customer analysis, right?
Mhm.
If you're going to go do 50-hour-long in-depth interviews, not only do you have to pay the participant, take an hour of their time, usually you're having an analyst or two on the market research team or the research study team having to join those interviews, moderate, transcribe. So all of that time
Hmm.
is now saved, right? These are happening
Right.
simultaneously. They're happening in parallel, right? And to your point, one of the biggest benefits is there's no scheduling. Hey, we're going to be doing a research study over the course of this week or this
Hmm.
month. Take this study whenever you have time. So one of the big benefits from a participant satisfaction standpoint is a lot of the end recruitment, the end sample really appreciates this study because they have more flexibility when they can ultimately take it. We don't have to schedule an hour-long phone call, and they're still getting their honorariums and
Hmm.
incentives. So it's not just a huge benefit for the research teams; it's a huge benefit for the participants in the study as well.
Hmm. Okay. Well, cool. Here, I took you away from what you were looking at. So, is there anything else you wanted to show us about the study here?
Well, I think we can dive in to an
Hmm.
actual example if that would
Okay,
be
great.
helpful. So this
Sure.
is actually the a preview of the test that we just did, or the study that we just conducted.
Hmm.
And so what you'll see as we kind of go through this, a few different things before I start. User Q interviews are a combination of both quantitative and qualitative. They basically contain almost every type of research methodology that you could imagine. The AI is using the computer screen to moderate this interview. And ultimately, what this does is it gives us flexibility. So we can do multiple choice, we can do Likert scale, we can do short end and open ended questions. And the participant can use the computer screen also to answer questions using multiple choice, but they can also use text and or audio. So it's a very flexible methodology that allows us to conduct a lot of different kinds of research, all while continuing to keep it in almost this transcript style format. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We won't go through the whole interview, but we'll go through at least a little bit of it. And again, the beginning of it is probably going to look very similar to a Qualtrics style survey, right? So,
And Max,
everything.
you're working as a participant right now.
Yeah, so this is the interview that actually
Hmm.
the Singapore residents took over the course of the last few days. So did your expectations meet the budget? And even right now, this entire interview is being dynamic. So everything that's happening is basically being controlled by the AI. And again, participants can take these interviews in text, they can take them in audio, basically whatever format they choose. So let's maybe go and do an example here. Overall, I was pleased with the budget. Ultimately, I think the biggest surprise was the skill credit that was applied to later career participants, where they can now get $4,000 to do continuing education after the age of 40, right? Because one of this is basically doing a bunch of different topics, a lot of different questions, and the AI is using the interview transcript, the background material, and all of these things to basically decide where do we go next in this interview. So even here, it sounds like the skills credit initiative for those over 40 was a notable standout for you. Can you share if there were any other elements of the budget that caught you off guard? So it noticed that I was talking about things that stood out to me, things that surprised me. Basically, I mentioned a very specific example of one of the elements of the budget that was something that stood out. Similar to a human moderated researcher, right? The AI is actually very interested in continuing to poke and prod here. What are the other areas that stood out? And it's going to cross reference this with my age, the demographics that I put in, whether I'm a Singaporean or just a long term resident, and this combination of deep quantitative and deep qualitative. is what allows us to do really, really, really exciting automated analysis at the end of these interviews, comparing different user segments, going deep into different topics. For this study, I think we had 200 pages of transcripts that we were then able to ultimately analyze and produce a final report.
A lot of us come from either a product or development or research side of the world, innovation. Um, but not all of us make the leap into offering products for these kind of things like you have. So, what inspired you to to really create this for the field?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. And I'm a big believer that every company in the entire world pivots at least one or two times, and no matter what. And no different for us. The genesis for UserQ actually came from my background in startups. I've been, a startup entrepreneur for, pretty much since the day I came out of school. And on top of that, I do a ton of, advising and consulting of different startups in pretty much every industry, B2B, B2C. And one of the things that I've noticed over the course of my career is if there is one common failure point in any company, small or large enterprise, it is usually that we suck at doing customer discovery. Unfortunately, I've experienced that both in the companies that I've done as well as in the companies that I've advised and consulted.
Yep.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. As operators, as founders, as engineers, we really like to build. We do often build solutions that are looking for problems. We don't always build the thing that actually solves the need of the market that we think that we're going to be addressing. And startups don't have access to big market research firms. They don't have access to agencies and consultants that can help them navigate their product decisions, their roadmap, their sales strategy, their go to market, their messaging. And ultimately, with the advances in AI, my original genesis was how do we give these tools to everyone instead of just
Yeah.
large companies that can afford to pay a McKinsey $500,000 a year to do a product landscaping study. And so if we can automate the that process, which is tough, then ultimately we are able to better support companies in making sure that they answer the questions that are probably the most important to their success, like what their customers want, what the market looks like, what messaging is going to resonate the most with people. And so my genesis was really actually going and working with companies of all shapes and sizes to help them do better research. And it just so turns out that, with where we're at right now, the biggest area that we can apply that is actually in the teams that are already doing research today.
And yeah, it's interesting. And we had gotten to know each other just a little bit by a couple conversations before this, and it struck me that I think you were thinking first that this might be really great for startups and maybe specific verticals,
Mhm.
but it sounds like there are other groups that have taken hold as well. So, what kind of where is it taking off right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the areas where we really have seen a lot of traction, and we're early, but areas we really seen a lot of traction are industry specific or geographic specific market research or strategy consulting firms. Now, with that said, right, as we continue to learn and we're doing projects with these firms, we're learning a ton about how to do good research, how to apply that to AI. And ultimately, our end goal even later this year is to ultimately launch a self-serve platform, right? Think
Mhm.
Qualtrics 10 years from now still can do all of the things it does today, but can also actually handle more of the front end of these studies, research design, qualitative interviews, not just quantitative surveys,
Mhm.
more automated reporting and analysis, right? Some of these tools today are so complex, and you need to know actually the background of how to do good research to use them appropriately. Well, one of the big goals for us on the AI side is actually that we can tell startups how to do better research without them maybe necessarily
Hmm.
having to know it, right? And I think a great example of that is the interviews. So many startup founders actually are good at going and talking to potential customers, but maybe they don't know all the questions that they should be asking. So AI can not just help
Mhm.
them automate that process, it can also make sure that we're helping them get the right answers, asking the right questions to potential target markets or customers or whoever the audience actually is for a study, even if it's a political survey. And then on the back end, right? I don't think a lot of startups necessarily know, or founders or operators really understand how to analyze the data, that they're getting when they're talking to a customer. Now, instead of
Mhm.
having all of this amazing data, but not necessarily knowing how to analyze it, the AI can actually go, oh, here's where the nuance is. Here's maybe another hypothesis to consider. Here's maybe some action items that would follow up. Here's maybe another A B test that we should run. So it also acts more from outside of just the analysis standpoint. It's also helping teams understand what the next steps they should take in their research are. And I think that
Mhm.
applies not just to market research teams, but definitely applies to startups and enterprises in every industry.
Well, that's actually, you're hinting at how it's what it's like to use, and I think everyone will want to see, like, hey, if I was going to be or us researchers, if I'm going to actually really use this tool, what is it like? So do you want to fire it up a little bit and just show us what it's like to create a study or to, kind of use it from the us kind of user perspective?
When we work with a new partner, let's maybe walk through an example. We just did a study for a new healthcare and life science company. Their goal was that they wanted to launch a new next generation sequencing device. Now, these are massive studies, right? If you're going to go do the R&D of launching a new next generation sequencing device, this can take 6 months. We might be talking hundreds of interviews with key opinion leaders or industry executives in the pharma or biopharmaceutical industry. And so what we do is we have an agent creation intake form where our partners or our clients will basically fill out this form, the background of, for example, the next generation sequencing landscape, the key learning objectives. Do most current small or large labs outsource to other vendors, or are they doing their next generation sequencing in-vice? Where is the market going in the future? All of these different learning objectives. We'll basically upload this market research brief or this intake form into our AI. The AI will analyze it and basically create, again, anywhere from a 30-minute to a 60-minute interview covering all of the major topics, questions, and learning objectives that we hope to answer, right? We'll basically send a test link to a partner so they can validate that the interview is acting like they want it to, right? Maybe they want it to probe more deeply in certain sections. Maybe they want to add more context to the interview agent for better follow up questions. But once we get past that step, we're actually distributing the interview right into the field. It's actually so simplified that sometimes we like to almost over engineer the process when really, again, most of our studies are accomplished in under 3 days from start to finish, all the way to an end final report. After we have collected the interviews and collected the raw data, we'll then close the study and run hundreds of different AI pipelines, both vertically and horizontally, on these interview transcripts, cross segment analysis, semantic analysis, topic modeling, keyword analysis, basic things like summarization, but then more complex things like uh, quantitative tallying on unstructured data. So maybe we'll have a topic where we'll have a lot of open ended back and forth between the AI and a research participant, and we want to actually go through all of the interviews and say, how many times were these pain points mentioned? How many times were these barriers mentioned? How many times were these challenges or opportunities mentioned? And now we can actually quantify a lot of the unstructured data to basically produce, quantifiable analysis and reporting, even on unstructured outputs where each interview may actually even be a little bit different. Right. So, again, really matching, I think, the human level of not just the moderation of an in depth interview, but also the human analysis that you would be doing if you took weeks to pour through hundreds of pages of interview transcripts. And, we're condensing that now by about 95% of the time and cost it would take to run one of these studies.
Max, I wanted to ask you, is it because there's this kind of release from just the time and effort it takes to analyze this? Are you recommending that people have larger samples for their studies, or is there anything that I would do differently as a researcher if I use your tool?
It is funny, we get a lot of partners where they're like, "Hey, we want to do 12 in-depth interviews." And we're like, "You know what? Maybe we should do 25." Right?
Mhm.
Normally, it would actually suck to have all of this unstructured data, because it really is so difficult to go through. That's why we don't see a lot of qualitative studies, right? When we were looking at
Mhm.
the Singapore example, and somebody was like, "Okay, how would we do this if we were doing this by, with a human, and we wanted to get this study out over the course of 3 days?" They're like, "You know what? We probably just wouldn't do it." Right? We would do a survey, or we would maybe do a focus group a few weeks after the budget was announced. But now, because the same AI that is doing the interviews is also doing the analysis and reporting, we have the ability to add a larger sample size and produce even more exceptional data at the end of it. And so, I think that it's not just about adding more data or a larger sample to a study. I actually
Mhm.
think one of the biggest advantages is now researchers get to focus on what they care about the most with it, which is research, right? They don't have to do the
Mhm.
basic analysis, they don't have to do the moderation, they're not transcribing, they're not scheduling interviews, they're not going out and just focusing on finding a sample and recruiting. After 48 hours, they have the answers that they're looking for. Now they can go deeper. They can focus on what is some of the nuance maybe that we want to really understand. What are the next steps, right? Allowing researchers to focus on research
Mhm.
instead of so many of the tedious human laborious tasks that we currently have to do in research, instead of getting to focus on what are we actually trying to really understand now that we have all of this data. And I think that is where we're
Mhm.
showing that this isn't a substitute, but it's a supplement to the research industry today.
Mhm. And so, yeah, honestly, I'm still kind of like absorbing this change, and so it's really interesting. Uh, w- so, you may have already described this, but where do you see your product and sort of the UX research or the market research industry sort of evolving over the next few years?
Totally. And another thing that you can actually find on LinkedIn, UserCue just released our 2024 AI market research predictions for this year. And, there's a lot of areas that I think research, whether it's UX, product, traditional market research, I think is absolutely going to change, right? Data is becoming cheaper, it's becoming more accessible. People are wanting answers more quickly. How do all of these teams how do they ultimately adapt, right? I think one of the biggest predictions that I have is that when you look at teams right now, whether it's B2B, B2C companies or market research firms, I think one of the biggest things to note is that if they probably don't look very different right now, right? Because the technology is still advancing, right? I think
Mhm.
Gardner released a study that said only 10% of teams are actually scaling AI solutions. The large majority of the rest of them are actually still in an experimentation or a piloting phase. But I think the ones that are in an experimentation and piloting phase right now are the ones that are going to prosper as the technology continues to advance. I think the quality gap in research is the biggest prediction I have over this year. There's a lot of firms that are shouting really loud about how much they're using AI, but they're not really truly investing in the R&D of understanding the tools that are out there. And I think that that is the biggest shift we'll see over the course of the next 12 months is the firms that are really investing in understanding the technology and where it's going are going to be the ones that are the most prepared to adopt it once it gets to a point where it shows real ROI and real value across the use cases that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we just gotta wait and see. It's funny how we're all catching up, um, and I appreciate that you've got this out here, and we're really so. If we actually wanted to try this tool, is it so? Just making sure, so it's available today. Like folks can. Is there any sort of demo, or would I talk to your sales team? How would I try if I wanted to try this as a viewer? What would I do?
Yeah, so we work very closely with a select number of firms, but we're always adding more partners. And so basically the way that we work is every single partner that we work with, we basically run a pilot, right? Because we want to
Hmm.
demonstrate the power and responsiveness of those of the studies that we do. And so we'll usually do a pilot, either a client project or work directly with a company or a team, and we'll do a research study, right? Usually over the course of just a few days. And then we usually are entering into larger, almost code development agreements with some firms where we're actually working hand in hand because the technology is advancing so rapidly. So the tool is not a self serve tool today. We work almost on a technology consulting basis where we're doing project based work with our partners, usually for the work that they're doing for their end
Hmm.
clients. And so that's basically how we do today, but very easy to set up, right? Usually we'll do a demo and potentially even within 24 hours we're launching a study with a team, and so it's a pretty quick process. And absolutely people can reach out to us both on our website tryuserq.com, or find us on LinkedIn and find a member of our team there and reach out, and we're always happy to schedule a demo as well.
Cool. Well, uh, thank you so much, Max. I mean, it's really, I don't know, 2 years ago, I couldn't really imagine this could work. So it is something. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And really, I think that's where we need to leave it. But thank you so much for everyone for watching this and keeping up with the latest on AI for UX research. And please subscribe if you enjoyed this, and let us know what other tools you'd like us to feature as well. And wishing you all brilliant insights with AI. So thank you once again, Max. This was awesome.